thank you very much. Maybe particularly my question to Rosita, but also maybe if Massimo really can answer, please do. But so my question is about this spiritual motivation spiritual motivation for these peace activities. Yeah, you did explain, but maybe I was not very clear exactly what was the reason, what was the motivation. Because only one hand, maybe they could just focus on religious activities because according to their teaching, kind of like a real peace, let's say, is going to be guaranteed by God. But you kind of mentioned that their motivation was for having kind of spiritual success.
Yes.
Well, maybe I want to hear more on this because it sounds like maybe ultimately, their motivation is in a kind of strict sense maybe kind of egoistic because they're concerned about their own spiritual success, but in order to achieve that end, they work for peace, let's say. And this sounds like also, I'm not really saying this is a bad egoism, but it sounds like also their real motivation is their own kind of spiritual success. So maybe this is just what I thought, but maybe you can.
Very Buddhist question.
Massimo is better to answer, but I will say my part because I'm not I'm not a big expert of the Bible, but how I perceive interviewing the people, talking to them, is they are very sincere believer what is written in the Bible. And my understanding would be that for them the Bible is a living book. And in the Bible is said that is like you should do this because the awakening, another word perhaps it would be right, awakening of the world for the peace, for the new millennium to come, that a lot of people should be awakened. So you should do something. That is, it's like they put in practice what they believe, because the belief is not only like individual alone, but it's something that you should put in practice. And these peace activities, education programs, youth program, women program, all of these, it's to help to awaken as many people as possible. It's not egoistic in any way, and because the point is I underline in my presentation is not to promote Shincheonji, it's to promote world peace, it's to promote new millennium. So it's a different paradigm. But Massimo is better in the what concerns Bible and.
I will use an example that perhaps if they were here, Shincheonji members will not particularly like, but because it's about Catholic character. And last week we were visiting Orléans, and Orléans is connected to Joan of Arc. And Joan of Arc, of course, heard, according to her story, voices from God saying you should fight the British for the freedom of France. And Joan of Arc asked God, but why the heck I should go and become a warrior and risk my life? Because if you, God, you really want France to be independent from the British, you can do it, just do a miracle. Why I should risk my life? And she ended up badly, she was burned at stake. Why you can do it. And God, of course, answered Joan of Arc, according to the traditional story, that I give the victory, but the human being should fight for it. Meaning the Christian God doesn't give the victory for free, wants the people to fight, and then he can give the victory. So I believe, as Rosita said, there are different brands of millennialism in Christianity. Some people can just sit like in a movie theater, and say we sit and watch, and God will do the show, and we will applaud at the end. But in some other brands of millennialism, of course, no Christian will deny that God may build the kingdom of peace without any cooperation. We are very small compared to God, but God Himself has decided that He will not do His part if we don't work with Him. So Joan of Arc, just because we visited Orléans, is one example, but there are many. And there is one brand in Christianity which says, of course, God can act completely independently of human beings, but He has decided to act with human beings. And I share the impression of Rosita. I don't believe Shincheonji members really believe in short terms they may achieve like a new global peace treaty, and even if they do, peace will not follow. And I believe now they have been operating this organization for many years, so they also understand if the aim will be to get a better public relation image, it doesn't work. Their public relation image remains quite negative. So if they keep doing, there should be some motivation which cannot be really calculated with a cost-benefit secular scientific analysis. So it should be theological and spiritual motivations for doing this. Yeah, that's typical of millenarian movements.
But on the other hand, yesterday I made a presentation. Fortunately, I would not remember because I don't have as good memory as Massimo has. So about the Sokagake, it was said that the old monks said that only praying is not enough. You should do something. So it's the same thing, only from perhaps a different angle, with a different motivation, but it's the same. You should do something to change the world. And without humans, you cannot do it. So.
Just a short comment to say that as a human rights organization, we are neutral politically and religiously, and we don't debate the merits of religions and or beliefs, and we don't align ourselves to any specific theology or worldview. But through my contacts with those young people in the Shincheonji church, I never had the impression that they wanted to instrumentalize the peace issues for other purposes, for example, proselytism, and that really I would say that they are aware, they are sincere in their motivation.
Oh, they're very sincere.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So 2 hands. So I think you were first, and then you being second. Okay.
I would like just to ask. You said that we should act, not only pray. Right? His Holiness the Dalai Lama as well pointed out that asking young generation to start the revolution of compassion. But listening here presentations, I heard that in this trend of religion, there are kidnapping things, there are many aggressive activities, from the point of view of parents, which I can't understand at all, maybe somebody else, but parents, killing their children, and so on and so far. I think Jesus Christ really was love and compassion, and there is no contradiction between Buddhism and Christianity on that point. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is acting together with Christian Church on this point of view, love and compassion. I do not understand why there are such activities inside this religion and on the.
But it's actually against this religion.
This religion. It's not this. Perhaps it was not clearly presented.
Maybe I didn't understand.
Kidnapping was against the members of this religion.
But these parents were really.
They were from a different.
Yeah, parents are normally fundamentalist Christians.
Yeah, then again question why fundamentalist Christians.
I believe
Christian conflicts.
By the way, we plan to
And
do this
competition.
in other conferences as we deepen and of course here we have again David Kim, who is an expert of the Korean context. But I believe this story in a way is very Korean. In Korea there is all branches of Christianity. And some branches of Christianity are arch-conservative and very politicized. And so they have all this anti-cult activity, branding groups of cults. Not only Shincheonji is victim of kidnapping, other groups are too. And so that's part of a very conflictual situation in Korea. And by the way, Rosita shows Reverend Yun, he went to jail too last week for breaching electoral law because he was campaigning for the election in a way and at a time. So the situation of Korean, particularly Christian religion, is a very complicated cauldron where many things happen and conflict runs very high.
Yeah, but sorry, how it is historically? What was really the religion of this country, Korea? I mean, historically, which was the religion?
Well, there were the three teachings, so Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism.
And you saw the percentages. Now it's
Now
Christians.
When Christians came. I believe your question is very valid. I will just add a small footnote that according to a doctoral dissertation by another Mr. Kim or Dr. Kim, there are so many Kims in Korea, at the University of Alberta, Korea fundamentalism, which in Europe is very marginal in Protestantism, and in US is important but not majoritarian, in Korea is more important than elsewhere. And he quotes even some of the early Presbyterian leaders who say we have no quarrel in being called fundamentalist. And so this anti-heresy movement in Korea from the 1960s, when they started going against the olive tree, and then the Unification Church, and then the War Mission Society, Church of God, and Shincheonji, and many others. It's a very confessional religionist movement, while the anti-cult movement, we know, like in France, where even Sokagake was, it was largely a secular movement, using secular argument, like close community, high intensity. But in South Korea, the anti-cult movement was largely a right-wing Protestant affair.
It's like, it's David, of course, he's better to answer, but I will answer my outsider interpretation because of your question. It's like, what originally was the religion in Korea, you asked? Yes. Because you remember, and many of us know in the West, we know the Korean Buddhism, we know, for instance, right? Even myself in US, I was in the Buddhist temple and etc. So it's we know it. As I understood myself, being in Korea and talking to people and etc. The Buddhism at some, because Korea suffered a lot from the Japanese occupation, and the religion was in a way connected to the occupier and connected to the corruption. And then people, they rejected, but they needed something to replace by it. So either they left the big road, like empty places, like 50-something% people, they don't believe in anything. And then some others, they needed something, so, and then the Protestants, they came and they took that place. And you have, for instance, for me, it was really surprising to go through Seoul, for instance. There's just few Buddhist temples, and you feel, like I was saying, like you feel the soul of Korea in that temple, but it's lost. It's because of this wars of the transformation and etc. It was lost, and the Protestantism they took really this opportunity.
Yeah, so
From our investigation in Japan several years ago, there was rather similar phenomenon that the perpetrators of kidnappings and deprogramming were coming from evangelical Pentecostal churches in the framework of their fight against heresies. And on that name, everything was possible. All the means, even the legal ones, were possible. Just the victims were Jehovah's Witnesses, also Unification Church, and it was thousands of them. So finally, it was solved through a famous case of Torogoto, who had been confined during 12 years. And at the same time, we developed a lot of advocacy at the UN and in other international institutions. And since 2013, there's never been any other case of kidnapping. But it was also a total omerta, total silence by the media, by the judiciary, the police, and so on. It was tolerated, and there was total impunity. Never a criminal case was accepted by any court, and only 5 civil cases, and one of them was successful by Torogoto. So it's really, and I think there are 3 dimensions in that problem. First, the religious one, the competition between religions, that's what we talked about. Also, cultural and also political. Political, it was already raised by Massimo. The Protestant voters are numerous, they are fundamentalists, they are right-wing, conservative, and so on, and so politicians prefer not to challenge them. And then cultural, what we notice that among the people who are kidnapped, many are and more are women than men. Because in the culture in Japan, and I see in Korea as well, the parents keep authority and control over their children, even if they are 30, 40, 50 years, if they are academics, professors, and so on, they still have to, let's say, obey to the family rules in general, and especially girls.
Okay, thank you.
So you've just answered my first question, was whether more forced conversion and kidnapping among women and young women than. So you've answered that. So a clarification. You showed 3 case studies, and the first 2, were they? Did you use headlines from newspapers or?
No, it was interviews. Interviews with the persons or a family member, in the case of the girl who lost her life, of course.
Okay. Because I was struck by the first 2 where it was young women, and the accompanying text was very clearly about kidnapping.
Yes.
But the third one, and I wrote it down, very much stressed this loving mother.
Yes.
Who was transformed, no doubt against her will, into being this kidnapper. And so I wondered how that played, whether you could sort of talk a little bit about that.
I'm very happy that you raised this case in particular, because I interviewed the mother and the son at the same time. And I had that same experience in Japan with a totally different outcome, I would say. No, it was out of love that the mother organized the kidnapping of her son. It seems unimaginable, ununderstandable, but it was out of love. And then after that, she realized that she was absolutely wrong in the way she wanted to solve the problem. And she investigated more and more. In the meantime, her son had disappeared from her life and contacted her back again about 2 or 3 months later, I think. And so there was reconciliation. And I wanted to insist on that. In some cases, such activities destroy families, because that's an argument that's usually used by the anti-cults against the cults and the sects, to use another word, more French or German, that they divide families, they destroy families. No, it's quite often the opposite, and there is even a court decision of the European Court insisting on that. I can find the reference for those who are interested. The other case about Japan I want to raise, I had one opportunity to interview the father and the sister, and and the daughter, and I asked the father, if you had to do it again, if you were tempted to do it again, would you do it again? He said yes. I asked the daughter, how would you feel? How do you feel now that you are a bit closer to your father about what he did? And she said, a wonderful answer. She said, I'm trying to forgive. So I had two different reactions in South Korea and in Japan in the same situation with the two interlocutors at the same time. As probably they never talked about it again in Japan, how they were feeling about that incident.
It's like the people that we met who were deprogrammed, kidnapped, and etc. So many of them, they were saying they are working on with repairing the family ties. That is like, even though it's a lot of trauma, but somehow they're really searching inside of themselves the forgiveness and to rebuild the connections. Because at the same time they know that the parents, they were like forced, because they were bulldozed by the programmers to do it. So it's like, when somebody is really like convincing you how important it is to do it, they finally they start, because they invest money, they find the place, and etc. So it's a long process.
Well, there is
a forgiveness in
yes,
people.
forgiveness is part of spirituality.
It's very beautiful.
I've never interviewed a Korean Christian deprogrammer, but I'm old enough to have interviewed quite a few deprogrammers of the 60s and the 70s in US. When it was extremely popular to go and deprogram members of, say, Scientology or the Hare Krishna, and perhaps 4 deprogrammers I know, I even keep in touch, and some of them, very few, they keep trying to be deprogrammers. Of course, they go to jail in the United States, so they cannot do this. But they try to relocate. For instance, I know of at least one who tried to relocate in China and work for the government, where of course he has impunity and he does this in jails against the Falun Gong member. So, but that's rare. Most deprogrammers went to different way of criticizing cults or working with parents and son in a different way, particularly because if they are honest, and some of them are honest people, they understood deprogramming doesn't work. The percentage of people who really was always very low. And after a few years in the West, groups like Unification Church of the Hare Krishna, they had special training, how to pretend you have been deprogrammed and congratulate the deprogrammer and then run away and sue the deprogramming court. That's very American, for millions. That's how deprogramming ended, because some deprogrammers went bankrupted by the high damages they had to pay. So some of the former deprogrammers now they do what they call family counseling. They try to put at the same table the family, and some of them are even happy if the son or daughter stays in the movement, the father and mother are still against the movement, but at least they meet for some weekends and try to be in peace. Because one important point, even with statistics in Korea, is thousands of people are kidnapped and confined, but thousands resist, and that's why they tell their stories or go to court and sue, because deprogramming is normally not very effective. And all self-respecting new religious movement now teaches followers how to resist deprogramming. So it is, you can, in the case of the poor Miss Gu, you can strangle your daughter, but that's not a solution either. So,
and talking about courts, it's absolutely difficult for children to go to court against their parents. Yes. So that's why there are so few cases. There were so very few cases in Japan, and the same. And again with the culture, here. But among the testimonies that I collected, many really went back to their parents, made the first steps, even living under the same roof. I said, every time I was thinking, how is it possible to take such a risk? But it's part of their spirituality. Love your enemies. And my parents are not my enemies, so I must love them, despite what they did.
Do you have any comments on the role of the media in the process of reconciliations? Just listening to your report, to me, the media is just adding fuel to the conflict.
Yeah, that's interesting in view. In a way, I'm grateful we didn't focus on the virus because scholars perhaps like less to talk about ongoing matters. We will be more able to reconstruct the virus story afterward. But surely the media are playing a very negative role. Of course, we should not generalize. We even read some sensitive comments of people who approached the real scholars, but they are in the minority. Normally, the media likes sensational stories, and so the media play a very negative role. And every time they see the cult, they have access to a reservoir of stereotypes they can immediately use. And I was very upset to see some respectable media running articles on the virus cases which are completely inaccurate and mixing up everything. For instance, foreign policy, I read foreign policy with pleasure, I like foreign policy, but in the article about the virus, it started by saying Shincheonji is a group with a bad theology. I mean, some people may say so, it's not my theology, I'm a Roman Catholic, but that has nothing to do with the virus. And perhaps has nothing to do with secular journalism to say whether the theology is good or bad. And we can't discuss the virus. Of course, Shincheonji admitted they made some mistakes, were slow in reacting, they apologized, they didn't immediately catch the magnitude of the problem, but they tried to cooperate with the authorities as best as they were able to. And to conclude on the role of the media, I believe that also is important to grasp the story of the virus, because what's the accusation? Okay, in the end they gave the list, to prepare a list of 240,000 people is not a small deal, so there can have been delays or inaccuracies. But now the main accusation is, okay, the government has the list, but it takes a lot of time to go through a list of, because the government even wanted all the foreign members, those who are not members but are preparing to be members. Now they have pretty much everything. They still claim some names are missing, but it should be minor. They have more than 200,000 names. But now they say it would have been much better if rather than the government going through the list, the people would have cooperated. In a classroom, the student raised the hand, I'm a member of Shincheonji, so I want to be tested. Or in the office, say, I'm a member of Shincheonji, I want to be tested. Why this didn't happen? This didn't happen because they can document, even through court cases, thousands of instances where people have been fired for being member of Shincheonji from their workplace because of such negative media image. Or students in school have been bullied, even beaten, And just last week, in the middle of the crisis, and the police is still investigating, there is this woman, and the husband discovers she's a member of Shincheonji, and they quarrel, and she falls from the 7th floor and died. So perhaps she really fell, it's possible, of course, but police is... So it's not a small thing to admit you are a member of Shincheonji or a couple of other cults who have very bad image in Korea.
The element also is that when the woman fell, people didn't have the compassion for the person who was killed or killed herself, but they were concerned if the blood is contagious. So that's also
that was commented in some media. People try to go away because they believe in by the way, she was not positive at the virus, but people were, it seems they were more concerned to run away, not to be contaminated by the blood than to see what was really happening.
And then is another the stigma, because now because they were, I mentioned in my speech that the names, they kept even from their families, as it was the case of this couple. And now it's not only that it becomes public, and anybody can know your name. So meaning anybody can come and harass you. So it's not even the problems inside of the families that may start to have, but it's also anybody can harass you. And some people already lost their work because they are Shincheonji. So it's a quite incredible situation.
Are domestic human rights organisations on this, really supportive of the sort of work you're doing, or are there?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. We have noticed. I've been in this area for 40 years now, I would say, and I've noticed that usually, let's say, secular human rights organizations, well-known ones, keep a distance from any religious freedom issues. We are, I would say, as a secular human rights organization, I think one of the very few organizations that deal with religious freedom, but not only religious freedom for the historical mainline religions and so on, but also for other religious movements, so-called cults, sects, and so on, because it's clear in the Universal Declaration and the ICCPR that it's not the religions that we protect, that we defend. It's the right of the people belonging to a religious or an atheist or a Gnostic association. It's the people that we defend. It's their right, and their right to choose the beliefs or to have no beliefs at all. So our position is very clear. I am Protestant. I was an atheist when I was young. And for me, it's really not a problem to defend atheists, to defend Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on. They are human beings, and that's the purpose of the ICCPR and the Universal Declaration.
There is also, it's Shincheonji before virus. It was not known.
Nobody knew.
It's a perfectly 100% Korean religious group. Like all the peace activities they do, they don't use the name of Shincheonji. So it's a different organization. When I was working in New York at the United Nations, on my office even, I know the logo because I was receiving the information, the invitations, and etc. So, but now with Shincheonji being publicized in the bad way, becoming infamous, it's difficult because first, it should be somehow the information, more information about who they are. That they are not a dangerous cult, which is portrayed right now. Because everybody, you open any mainstream outlet, everywhere you see cult, dangerous cult, and everybody is recycling this dangerous cult, where it's nothing about being dangerous. And now is to change that. Somebody is defending the dangerous cult, because what it will stay in the minds of people, dangerous cult. Because the dangerous cults, perhaps they even created the virus. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's like, CAA perhaps after all didn't create the virus. Now it would perhaps Shincheonji created the virus. Because that's how the things they work.
Well, that happened before. It was the Jews during the Great Plague.
Yeah, like Middle Ages and the 21st century, so it's slightly more educated.
Last year we defended 5 Scientologists that were in prison in Russia because it was unfair trials. So for us there is no limit to defend individuals. We don't support Scientology at all, we don't support Jehovah's Witnesses or Hare Krishna and so on, but we defend the rights of their people.
We support their right to believe or not to believe. Like all of us, they have the right, the sacred right to believe or not to believe. And that is something that must be defended.